This is episode 15 of Radio ArtEZ, a podcast by Studium Generale ArtEZ. Welcome back. As you probably know by now, Studium Generale usually hosts a lot of events. And with the pandemic going on, that, of course, is not possible in the way we are used to. And we're looking at ways in which to move that programming online. One of those programs is the series of kitchen table conversations, curated, amongst others, by Mirjam Zegers. And we have Mirjam with us. Hello, Mirjam.
Hi, Dennis.
The episode we're about to hear is an offshoot of the Kitchen Table Conversations, which, as I mentioned, is partly curated by you. Can you tell me a bit more about this series?
Yeah, the Kitchen Table Conversations is a series of meetings with selected guests, mostly artists who developed interesting ways of connecting with people and with the world around them. Before COVID-19, we were located at ArtEZ Zwolle, and we collaborate with most of the ArtEZ departments and also with the online arts magazine, Mr. Motley.
All right. And what happens during these conversations? What's the aim?
Well, we try to create a situation where all present can have a conversation, which is both serious and both informal. And we hope that people can exchange ideas cross-disciplinary. And we hope to empower each other in forging new kinds of relations with the world around them, with people, with society, and around the themes of home and a sense of belonging. What does it mean for the guest at our table, these notions of home and belonging? And what does it mean for you or for others? And that, until now, led to very interesting conversations.
I actually went to one of those conversations back when we could still go out. And I do remember the table, but I also remember food.
Yes, that's indeed a very important element. Before the pandemic, we physically came together, sharing food around the kitchen table to create a nice atmosphere. And, well, we will only be online now with this podcast as a first feature. So I would say make sure there is some food on your kitchen table.
Do you have a specific type of food in mind?
Pizza, pasta, actually all shareable food to keep a little bit into the same idea. And if you're wearing a headphone, maybe it should not be too crunchy.
Maybe for this episode also soul food would be a good idea.
Oh, that is a very good idea. That really very much fits the content.
Yeah. Speaking of which, what will we be listening to?
Well, Elaine Mitchener is an extraordinary vocalist and movement artist living in London. And I know her from the music scene. Years ago, we met several times. And she was scheduled for the Holland Festival 2020 with her program Vocal Classics of the Black Avant-Garde. But then, unfortunately, COVID-19 was in the way, and I really had looked forward to this. So I'm very happy that we could invite Elaine to ArtEZ. And in this podcast, she will explore the theme of unheard voices through music and spoken word, which evoke a time or a space. And in her work, she draws very strong connections between individual and collective history. And her voice is really amazing. It masters such a wide range of vocal techniques coming from all kinds of traditions.
And now we are invited to sort of behind the scenes of that extraordinary talent.
Indeed, we can peer into her ideas that are on the basis of her work. And I think, well, to me, it was very revelatory, and I really want to hear it over and over again.
Yeah, that sounds exciting. I'm really curious to listen.
Yeah, let's just do it. Let's listen to Elaine Mitchener.
Hey, time. relationship between this country and the West Indies and Caribbean is inextricable. The first British ships arrived in the Caribbean in 1623, and despite slavery, despite colonization, can she explain how many have been deported? It is her country. Can she tell the House how many have been denied help under the National Health Service? How many have denied pensions? How many have lost their jobs? This is a day of national shame.
Born and raised in East London of Jamaican heritage, as well as a rich diet, I was raised on a rich and varied musical diet of ska, reggae, dub, electro-funk, soul, pop and gospel music, with a sprinkling of classical repertoire courtesy of BBC Two television. Watching Giselle and Swan Lake ballets introduced me to orchestral music, and much later BBC Radio 3 and the local Seventh-day Adventist church, which I was dragged to and then later enjoyed attending with my family, and where I discovered an incredible musical talent of other young people who looked like me, and where I also discovered for myself my own creative talents. These were all contrasting voices which I lived alongside and within me, plus exterior voices of the surrounding environment, which, in the East End of London, was, and still remains, urban, loud, noisy, exciting, happy, and dissonant. These sounds first inspired me. London hosts a myriad of voices that speak to us from the past through monuments and statues dotted around the vast metropolis. They constantly speak to us, whether or not we choose to listen, or are aware or unaware of their presences. I realised from a fairly young age that many of these historic monuments were placed by others to memorialise their actions. In fact, we were taught this from a young age. Heroic feats such as Nelson's column in Trafalgar Square, which stands 52 metres high, built to commemorate Admiral Horatio Nelson, who died at the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805. The monument was constructed between 1840 and 1843 to a design by William Railton at a cost of £47,000 in old money, the equivalent of over £4 million in 2019. But does anyone know about Nelson's support of the Atlantic slave trade? No. Monuments about philanthropic founder of modern nursing, Florence Nightingale, who had a statue erected to memorialise her achievements in 1915. But Mary Seacole from Jamaica, whom Nightingale refused to work with, and who went on to set up the British Hotel to help wounded soldiers behind the line during the Crimean War, had to wait until 2016 for her achievements to be memorialised. The historical landmark, the Egyptian obelisk, nicknamed Cleopatra's Needle, should still be in Egypt, but instead rests on London's embankment. And lastly, an extreme example of an individual's voice being enforced upon the public can be seen with the Albert Memorial. The Albert Memorial is one of London's most ornate objects, which stands in its golden opulence opposite the Royal Albert Hall. Unveiled in 1872, it commemorates the death of Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's beloved husband, who died at the young age of 42. Sad as it was, the people of London did not request this statue. Queen Victoria, who would go on to mourn the death of her husband for another 60 years, demanded it. If made in 2010, it is estimated that it would have cost £10 million of taxpayers' money. With Albert's seated golden figure glowing and gazing out like a Roman emperor, he presides over Europe, Asia, Africa, the Americas, and these figures which he sits upon are cast with longing, subservient gazes, and they serve as a constant reminder to all of Britain's glorious colonial past. The Albert Memorial is loud, and it's proud, and it's kitsch. It is hard to ignore, but who does it speak for?
Jones, why aren't West Indians applying to come to this country in any numbers?
Well, I would say that the Commonwealth Immigrants Act has acted as a deterrent against their coming. And in fact, that was the intention of the Act, which many of us considered a colour bar bill.
Well, can I say to the Home Secretary that the relationship between this country and the West Indies and Caribbean is inextricable. The first British ships arrived in the Caribbean in 1623, and despite slavery, despite colonisation, 25,000 Caribbeans served in the First World War and Second World War alongside British troops.
What do you do with the information that you have absorbed over the years? How do you process the facts, the fictions, and decipher and decode their meanings, their insinuations, representations, accusations? What applies to you and what is important for you to retain and to ignore or to forget? Can I, you, we unforget? And if so, why and how? What purpose can it serve? How to make us better? In my creative practice, I am attempting to develop a dynamic methodology which will allow me to articulate my complex identity as a 21st century classically trained Black, British, born, working class woman of Afro-Caribbean descent. I do this by combining a wide array of techniques and performance tropes, drawn from multiple global vocal traditions, both traditional, Western classical, contemporary, vernacular, and experimental, and fusing these with a variety of approaches to improvisation, philosophies of movement and performance art, as well as aspects of contemporary new music theatre. My interest in how we understand or misunderstand or misrepresent the past has led me to find ways in my work to interrogate these given narratives. The following clips have been separated by 50 years and thousands of miles, but are addressing the same problems. They highlight how people have taken agency of their own voices and in doing so take responsibility for their voices being heard to effect positive changes in society.
This statue of a 17th century slave trade owner, Edward Colson, in Bristol, stands no more. Protesters then dragged it through the street to the harbour. For the second day, cities across the country held rallies. In Glasgow, they stood in their thousands, and over the weekend, campaigners renamed roads that had links to the slave trade.
Ripped to the ground in just seconds. This was an historic moment. The statue to this 17th century slave trader has stood for more than 120 years.
By confrontation, violence.
Oh, is that the question you were asking?
Yeah.
See, that's another thing. When you talk about a revolution, most people think violence, without realizing that the real content of any kind of revolutionary thrust lies in the principles and the goals that you're striving for, not in the way you reach them.
In Fred Moten's book, In the Break, The Aesthetics of the Black Radical Tradition, he talks on the resistance of the object with regards to the history of blackness. Aunt Hester's Scream. The history of blackness is testament to the fact that objects can and do resist. Blackness, the extended movement of a specific upheaval, an ongoing eruption that unarranges every line, is a strain that pressures the assumption of the equivalence of personhood and subjectivity. While subjectivity is defined by the subject's possession of itself and its objects, it is troubled by a dispossessive force object, exerts such that the subject seems to be possessed, infused, deformed by the object it possesses. I'm interested in what happens when we consider the phonic materiality of such proprietary exertion. Adrian Piper's theatricality. What if the beholder glances away, driven by aversion as much as desire? This is to ask not only what if beholding were glancing, it is also, or maybe even rather, to ask what if glancing is the aversion of the gaze, a physical act of repression, the active forgetting of an object whose resistance is now not the avoidance but the extortion of the gaze. Inspired by Fred Moten's ideas around the resisting object, also Walter Benjamin's philosophy of Eingedenken from his theory of the knowledge of history, that is, the concept of remembrance or remembrance as an act of responsibility, I try to develop ideas around our common environments and how they speak, represent us or not, trigger responses and actions. In my works, the then plus the now equals now time and sweet tooth, these are demonstrated with ideas through sound and movement.
You look at me, sexist notions of female passivity. So you see me submitting to you.
these examinations of historical facts, I seek to determine ways of speaking outside of the body. This involves, but is not restricted to, the awareness of rooms and how they speak, or have their own voices within and outside the embodied experience, and to expand the notion of the voice and what that voice is to create a sonic action work, leading to new modes of artistic expression and artistic communication, a communication of fragments of ideas and emotions drawn from that research and experience. This can often mean a sense of time and space taking us from the present to the past to the future and back again. An excellent example of this kind of an exploration can be heard in Pamela Z's Bone Music. Who speaks for you? How does it speak? How can you speak back? My approach to creating often involves utilizing my extensive skills and experiences in free improvisation, as well as my classical music training. I am interested in the idea of conveying meaning without the use of vocabulary, thereby I am able to tap into a language of universal human experiences. The voice can also be extended through instruments and space, inanimate objects, as an extension of their voice, says. I also work without narratives so that the audience / observer experiences are immediate and intimate without being physically immersive. Rather, they are emotionally engaged in whatever is unfolding in front of them as they are part of the journey. Of course, this approach isn't particularly new, and focusing on the female voice, which has been silenced for centuries, there are a number of vocalists who have explored these realms, deconstructing text to its basic sound. For example, Kathy Berberian, gospel singer Twinkie Clark, avant-garde jazz vocalist and sound poet Jeannie Lee, and also Hungarian poet, actor and performance artist Katalin Ladic, who explores language through visual and vocal expressions as well as movement and gestures. Her artistic expression through nudity and sensuality caused accusations of pornography and indecency, which highlighted the deeply ingrained skewed morality of Yugoslav society, that is, representative of sexism not only in the region but universally. Yet, rather than discouraging Ladic, it only fired her up. She has said, "I want to engage my audience in a kind of ritual, a public ceremony, celebrating the unity of body and spirit. This allows me to espouse every spectator. This is the deal. I am naked, and the audiences are relieved of prejudices." A few years later, in 1978, she performed arguably her most significant and artistically astute work, Black Shave Poem, partly as a response to the media's sexualization of the female body and of her art in general. In her work Opus, it is a film that combines Ladic's interest in writing, image, sound and performance. When the film's original soundtrack was lost, a new interpretation of the visual form was recorded. The work, made in Yugoslavia in the early 1970s, transposes the achievements of visual poetry into the world of sounds. The main motive is an image of the letter O, which is subjected to various transformations. The film, as a visual score created by Attila Cernic, is used to create the vocal performance. Laddish sings, whispers and shouts, exploring the relationships between visual effects and their reflections in sound. The film is a poem, a piece of music, and the documentation of a highly erotic performance all at the same time. Abby Lincoln changed the direction of her voice from jazz singer to political vocalist, calling out the racist society of the USA and further afield. Lincoln had made a well-publicised leap from the conservative supper clubs of the 50s to the progressive jazz scene of the 60s. She had removed most of the love songs and standards from her repertoire, and her voice took on a coarse tone with anger that seemed to simmer right below the surface. Singing the politically charged lyrics of Oscar Brown Jr., Freedom Now represented a breakthrough for both the vocalist and lyricist.
Drive a man, he made a life, but the mammy ain't his wife. Chopping cotton, don't be slow, better finish out your row. Keep a moving with that plow, drive a man'll show ya how.
Finally, Unheard voices. The murder of George Floyd has been internationally condemned, leading to unprecedented global demonstrations and, in some countries, the removal of statues that memorialised its colonial past. Not only are these societies having to face their histories, but in other parts of the world, political and social activists call for a change of systems of oppression. These are actions led by the people for the people. So how do we as artists respond to global events? What is your voice practiced for, and what is its relevancy? Where are you in this climate of change?
The wonderful Elaine Mitchener. If you want to know more about Elaine and listen to some of her work, be sure to check out her website, elainemitchener.com. Elaine also wrote a blog post for the Studium Generale website, and you will find links to both websites in the show notes. And if you're listening to this before the 7th of December 2020, you're in for a treat. Mirjam, what will happen on the 7th of December?
On the 7th of December, between 5 p.m. and 6 p.m., we will all have the opportunity to meet Elaine Mitchener live. She will be online in a real kitchen table conversation with her, and we will have an hour to look back on what she told in the podcast. People can also participate, see the call on our website, and we will talk further on Unheard voices.
And if people listen to this later on, there will also be a recording of that, right?
Indeed. Yes. If you are listening after 7 December, you will find a recording of this kitchen table conversation on our website.
Yes. We'll put the link in the show notes.
Great.
So if you can, join the conversation. If you're too late, be sure to check it out online through Studium Generale's website. For now, this has been episode 15 of Radio ArtEZ. Big thanks to Elaine for providing us with this great essay. And do ask yourself, where are you in this climate of change? Thanks. for listening.